Well, hey, everybody, good day to you. Thank you for joining us for the Daily Word. My name is Kyle. I'm one of the pastors at Redeemer, and we're going to be continuing our study in the Gospel of Luke. We're in chapter 8, and we're going to be in verse 22 is where we're going to be starting today. Just give me 1 second here. And so we're in a section here that Luke wanted to record, I think, to give us a kind of broad perspective of Jesus' power over everything. And I think that's a good way to think about this section, because we're presented in this section with three kind of miraculous events that only God could do, and that only somebody with divine power could exercise control in these situations. And so what we see, and I think that, again, if you just walk away with that Luke is recording for us just this truth about Jesus, that he in fact is God. So in the first four verses here, 22 to 25, we see a very commonly known miracle, and that is when Jesus calms the storm. And it says that he got in a boat with his disciples. He went to the other side of the lake, and they set out, and he fell asleep. And as they were sailing, what you got to know about the topography of the Sea of Galilee there is you have a low plateau or a low kind of plains on one side and a high plateau, the Golan Heights, on the other side. And what would happen is, in the cold desert air would sink and rush down the valley or the plateau wall down to the lake and create these massive waves and massive swells. And it's not something that would go away easily. These were violent storms, and it would take an absolute miracle for somebody caught in this to be rescued. And so what happens is Jesus falls asleep, windstorm comes down on the lake, and the boat's filling with water, and they went to wake him and say, Jesus, we're perishing here, we're dying, you got to help us. And he awoke, and it says, and he rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased. So this is not like, okay, he's like, hey, everything's going to be fine, let me pray and ask my Father for help, and then everything's going to settle down slowly. This is by the power of the Spirit. He stood up and rebuked the wind, and it stopped immediately. There is an immediacy to Jesus' miracles in which there's no other explanation other than, waves that are 10, 20, 30 feet high just all of a sudden come to a stop. And that takes divine power. And then he asked them, where's your faith? And they marveled to one another, saying, who then is this that he commands even the water? His very disciples in the boat with him are still figuring Jesus out. And there's somewhat of a grace built into that. I love that. But they're just amazed at what Jesus can do. But the story doesn't end. It says in the verse 26 and following, then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite of Galilee, and when Jesus stepped out on the land, there was a man from the city who had demons. This is the guy who's known as the Gerasene demoniac, or the guy that you've all heard of who had all the demons, and Jesus cast them out into this herd of pigs. And so Jesus runs into this guy. So first of all, in that first section, we see Jesus exercising and commanding power over nature. Right? Nature obeys him. And as we see from Colossians 1, it is Jesus himself who upholds all things by the word of his power. So by the word of his power, the wind and the waves ceased. He is indeed God. And in this situation with this man, this Gerasene demoniac who is filled with demons. In fact, Jesus says, what is your name? And the demons say, Legion, for we are many. They're speaking as a group. And they see him and they recognize him and they say, please don't throw us into the abyss. Please don't make us depart from this place. Instead, cast us into that herd of pigs. And so what they did, this man had been living tortured by these unclean spirits for so long. He had kind of lost his mind. He didn't know who he was. He was hurting himself. He was a danger to others. And they asked permission to not be cast in the abyss, but to leave and go into the pigs. And as soon as Jesus said go, they were gone. They were out of this man, and they were into this herd, and this herd threw itself into the sea, and the pigs drowned. And what's interesting, it says, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone, sitting at Jesus' feet, clothed and in his right mind, and they were very afraid. Think about it. You've been afraid of this guy for so long, just wandering around out in the wilderness, hurting himself and shrieking and screaming and threatening people. And all of a sudden he's at peace. So now you recognize that this man who freed him has more power than those spirits who were overcoming this man. And Jesus used this opportunity as a way to get the word out about himself. It says, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. And this crazy man who was infected by these demons is now in perfectly sane mind, and he went out proclaiming throughout the whole city what Jesus had done for him. So even there, we have a testimony of the reason that Jesus would perform miracles is not simply a mercy. It's not simply to give people comfort, right? There's an element of that, but the purpose was to be a witness, a testimony, a sign, a wondrous testimony of Jesus' divine power and his ability not only to heal in the flesh, but to forgive sins. And then this last section of this, we see Jesus healing this man named Jairus' daughter. It says Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, so they're back over on the other side of the lake in Galilee. And there's a man came named Jairus who was a ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house. For he only had a daughter about 12 years of age, and she was dying. And the people around Jesus pressed in. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she had spent all of her living on physicians, she couldn't be healed. And she came up behind Jesus, and this is so great, she touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately that discharge ceased. She was healed perfectly in her body. And Jesus stops. I mean, this is in the midst of a rushing crowd. You think people are crowding in and bumping around. And he stops. And he's like, wait a minute, who touched me? Who touched my coat? Because he says, for I perceive that power has gone out of me. And I love that, Jesus, he's so powerful and he's so willing immediately that the power departs. And it just leaves of his already granted volition, and he recognizes it. And the woman saw that she wasn't hidden, and she came trembling. She was afraid, and she declared before everyone that she was the one. And Jesus said to her, daughter, this is a kind thing. So your faith has made you well. In kindness and grace, he says, your faith, not me touching me, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. And while he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, your daughter is dead. Before we get there, so Jesus has exercised his authority over nature, his authority over the world, the spiritual world, and now his authority over sickness and disease. And now what we see is him about to exercise power over death itself. This girl has died, and I think God used this little interlude to prove that the girl wasn't sick, that she was actually dead at this point. And Jesus goes to them with Peter, James, and John, and they're all mourning and weeping. And Jesus says, do not weep, for she is not dead. She's merely sleeping. And he's not making a statement that she's not physically dead. He's making a statement that because I'm here, it's just her flesh asleep. I will reunite them. And they laughed because they knew she was dead. Who do you think you are? And he goes, I'm about to tell you who I think I am. And Jesus took her by the hand and called out, saying, child, arise. So when it says he called out, this is an authoritative statement. He didn't say, oh, man, I hope this works. He said, child, listen to me and come back to life. Arise. And her spirit returned, and she got up at once, and he directed that something should be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them not to tell anyone what happened. Now you see this contrast between go tell everyone in the Gerasenes and don't tell anyone in Galilee. This was at a point in Jesus' ministry where, as we see in Matthew 12, he began concealing the message of the kingdom to the Jews because they rejected him as their Messiah. The leadership in Matthew 12 rejected him and said that he was empowered by Satan to do his ministry. So he says, fine, I'm going to take my ministry to the Gentiles. This is a perfect example here of him going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the Decapolis, to the Gentile nations, and giving them the gospel, and yet concealing the truth and only giving it to certain people here in the region of Galilee because they were now under divine condemnation and judgment. So again, Jesus, fully God, fully sovereign, control over the natural world, control over the spiritual world, control over sickness, and control even over death, and showing mercy and grace amongst all of those stories. So I hope that's encouraging to you. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your reading. Go back and read every verse kind of in context now and enjoy what you learn about Jesus today. We'll see you next time.